Well, Guhan, thank you for joining us and welcome to Two Healthcare Guys. So we're really glad to have you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have a nice, fun discussion today.
It's a great stuff. So first off, I got to ask, what is that in the background? Like that?
That is a racing simulator. So I'm an avid motorsports fan, which is a dressed up way of saying I'm a gearhead. Um, I am all about racing. I love to race cars, and I break them and I fix them and I do it all over again. So this allows me to practice without having to spend the money on breaking and fixing.
It's a lot easier to fix that one, right?
It is. It is.
And what race is in the background there? What are you at a track? Is that
That
some?
is Watkins Glen.
Ah, okay, cool, very
Yep.
cool, very nice. No, well, glad that you could join us. This is a conversation that Colin and I've been looking forward to. You definitely have a unique background. I like to think about gentlemen in your position more of a technologist as well as a businessman, as you're able to look at both sides. I know you've had multiple leadership roles, and I'd like to kind of let you start with that. Tell us a little bit more about your recent background and how you got to where you were. Carl, you good?
Sounds great.
All right. Yeah. So currently, I am a consultant. I provide advisory services for companies looking to create some strategic road mapping around their business models for IT specifically. That's where my wheelhouse is in terms of looking into what a company's value chain is and then figuring out where should we make some investments, where should we sometimes let other people handle it, and what type of people do we need in order to solve those problems and challenges that the company is facing, not only today, but the ones that they're going to be facing based on market trends, et cetera. Prior to that, I've actually had roles in several different industry verticals, which has been exciting for me because I'm a lifelong learner. I'm a student forever and always. And I started my career. I grew up in New Jersey, so if you work in IT in New Jersey, you're either working for a pharmaceutical or a bank. That's basically those are the big industries there. I worked for a bank. I started out at actually I started at Bell, but then I went into banking. Worked for State Street Bank, J.P. Morgan Chase for several years, and then I moved to Texas, continued working in the banking industry, but then moved into retail, which was an exciting switch because banking is pretty high tech. Retail can be bleeding edge, sometimes, unfortunately, bleeding edge. Things can break. And then I moved into higher ed. My father was a professor and he's retired now. My mom was in IT her whole life, so you can say maybe I was bred for the position. But moved into higher education. I identify with the calling quite a bit. You know, it's not about the income, it's about the outcome. And that's been one of my defining factors in my career going along. And, you know, compensation comes in many flavors. Cash is nice, but when you have that fulfillment that you're actually making a difference, especially to something much larger than just yourself or your immediate surroundings, I my work has to have meaning. Otherwise, I don't enjoy what I do. So moved from there into healthcare. So I was in healthcare at Solus Mammography. I was a CIO over there for a few years and learned a ton about healthcare. And my wife had been a patient there for 14 years, believe in the company 100%. And it was exciting to be part of that company and part of some decision making processes around the technology they were going to choose. So then I moved on from there thinking, you know what, I've had such a broad background, which brings me back to my current role where I provide advisory services for clients in various different industry verticals. And it's been a lot of fun. It's a very different world when you're solving problems for several companies at the same time. But maybe that explains my follically challenged status. But it's all good. Having fun doing it.
How interesting and excited I've worked in all those different, like totally separate industries. I'm actually an alumni of Tarrant County College, so that's really cool. But is there what what does a technology have to do with education? Can you help me understand a little bit there or something? What did you do at TCC?
Yeah, so at TCC, I was over all of the technology that runs in the classrooms, all the technology that's outward facing from the way students interact with the college. You know, these days, this is your front door. You know, this is there's no longer that brick and mortar door you open into the hallowed halls of University XYZ. So, how do you bring that technology? How do you meet students where they need to be met? And one of the best things I did at TC, that we had a great team around me that was ready to deliver. It was an excellent experience. Actually, I would call it one of the pinnacle points of my career, was creating something called a hackathon, where it really took a lot of understanding what is a college really in business for, and what kind of impact does a college have. And the word college and business are sometimes funny words to put in the same sentence, but at the end of the day, you have a purpose, right? And creating that hackathon was a really deep understanding of what does a college do, especially a community college. It has even more of a specific place in the development of a region. A community college takes students who most of the time have never been to college before, and sometimes their families have never been to college. You're taking them, you're recruiting them, and you're training them to give them ultimately a better job, a better shot at a different kind of life. It's a pretty massive environment to be part of, a massive impact to be part of, and 1 in 22 people in Tarrant County go to that college. That's how big it is. And you meet people all over the place who are TCC alums. And that hackathon, what we did was we took that entire purpose, that business model slash purpose of the organization, and we put it into one day. We recruited students to come in. We taught them in the morning how to hack into a healthcare company. Now, this was a mock healthcare company, but we taught them how to hack into a healthcare company, find out what are the crown jewels, what is important when you're
Mm.
stealing data. And then we fed them lunch, because if you feed students, it's a lot easier to recruit students. And then in the afternoon, what we did is, all right, you hacked in the morning successfully and you found the crown jewels, you captured the flag, if you will. But now in the afternoon, we taught them how to take those same exploits that they were able to, explore the vulnerability of, and block them all. So we kind of taught them both sides. How do you attack, but how do you defend? And that gave them a great insight into cybersecurity. It was taught by a partner that we brought in, Cisco. So they were learning from some of the best. And at the end, we also had the partners, the suppliers, TCC observe. And at the end of the day, 3 students received job offers. So in one day, we were able to recruit, train, feed, and also get them opportunities that were better than what they were doing right now. So it was really a huge accomplishment for just that one day. And the great thing is, subsequently, I had companies and other organizations begging to be part of it, because they had heard about it, and they heard about how successful it was. It was really quite a great thing to be part of. And when you have a willing team, when you have that ability to influence, and you can market the appropriate motivators to the right people, saying, hey, look at what we're doing in one day. It's not just about tech. It's about the core customer and their needs. In this case, what is a student, what does a inhabitant of this region really need? They need training. They need inspiration. They need role models. They need ultimately a job that they're going to be very happy with. And it worked out really well. So very proud of that accomplishment. The team did a great job putting it all together, and the whole day cost $27. That was Jason's Deli for lunch. So it was a pretty good day all in.
I can tell you, I love that. That's you've done what so many people wish they could do, right? You kind of what I call you've architected the art of the possible. You took college students who needed, access to thought leaders and to technology and to business process and to understand the business problem and what those risks were, and you brought them all together. So I think that's pretty compelling. Um, tell us, how have you used that experience again in life? Have you had that opportunity?
I've had opportunities in different ways. Now, to put together a hackathon in every organization I've been part of, I can use elements of it to be successful for different purposes. And I'll give you an example. Um, at uh, at Solus, one of the things that we did, and actually, I'll take even my personal example of Solus. How was I
So
able
may I
to?
interrupt you for 1 second, Guhan?
Yeah, yeah.
Educate. Okay, Solus. To me, that's quite the business. You don't mind educating the audience about Solus and their impact and their influence within the medical community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure thing. So Solus Mammography operates in 7 markets across the country. There's about 80 centers across the country that perform mammography services, bone density services on the radiology side of preventive and diagnostic medicine. And The business model of Solus is a very interesting one. It's serving a very underserved and almost undiscovered community. So 1 out of 2 women, this is a staggering statistic, but 1 out of 2 women over the age of 40 don't get mammograms yearly, and insurance covers it 100%. So why aren't they getting it? And how do you tap that potential? Um, a mammogram provides early detection, or at least peace of mind in either direction of, yes, I'm okay, or we found something early enough where the treatment plan is not going to be that significant and life impacting. And the mortality rate of early detection is almost zero. It's phenomenal. So giving women peace of mind, whether or not they found something or not out of the result of that mammogram or diagnostic mammogram, is really what Solus's model is all about. So instead of walking into a cold environment, and no knock on hospitals or providers in that space, but sometimes hospitals can appear a bit cold on that side when you're walking in with such heavy concerns on your shoulders that you're going in for this diagnostic procedure that, one, is painful. I mean, if men had to get mammograms, it would be tough. It's a tough, it's painful, but also waiting on that result and agonizingly long sometimes waiting for that result. How do you get timely, accurate results in a spa-like environment that's warm and welcoming? That's really what Solus is all about. So they'll partner with hospital systems. They partner with some of the largest in the country, like HCA, Einstein, and University of Chicago Medical Center. Three huge, huge partners that they already have a patient pipeline. And now the key is, how do you get more of those patients to come in and have compliance, meaning coming in every year so that they can have an effect, a positive effect on their treatment plans. So that's what Solus does. And it's a vastly geographically diverse environment with 80 centers across the country. And as you know, in radiology, images are about 100 times larger than any other type of image. So I sometimes joked that I ran a trucking company. How do you get the largest payloads across the shortest distance quickly enough? How do you bring these prior images to these radiologists so that they can make accurate diagnoses? That was the technology element that I had to cover with Solus, amongst many other things. Of course, integrating with hospitals, as many healthcare folks know, is real easy, right? So,
Right.
being facetious there, but it's a challenging environment, but it's all for the right reason. And keeping that patient first mindset is what needs to help drive focus continuously through it. So that's what we were really focused on during my tenure over there, and they continue to be that way.
So, coming from the provider side,
Yeah.
what are the challenges that you see in the imaging industry? Again, from the provider perspective, and what would you want vendors to be focusing on just to better support you?
So vendors in general help to provide a lot of architectural insight on how things are being built on their side. Of course, they're subject matter experts of their own products, but they have to be able to appeal to why their architecture serves the patient better. So understanding business process flows of, all right, I need to get results out quickly. The results need to be easy to consume. And I need to be able to understand these images. I need to be able to get to as many images as I can, because radiologists, one of the metrics that they're measured upon is turnaround time. How quickly are they able to do these things? Now, not for they don't want to sacrifice accuracy for speed, never. So, how do we equip radiologists with the tools that they need in order to serve the patient the best and follow that value chain, right? Vendors often provide a little bit too much in terms of the services around, like PACS imaging systems, for example. PACS, in my opinion, needs to be focused on how do you have an appropriate image repository that can retrieve and give images as quickly as possible, render in the highest definition as possible, but at the same time, it's got to be timely. You can't have these things sitting there and you can't have a screen painting super slow. That doesn't work. It doesn't work in the radiology space. So what we really need to do is have a vendor take the PACS functionality of keeping priors and the metadata around that stuff, keeping information about that particular image and about that patient at a easy to grab type of location for itself. Let that be the plumbing of the PACS system. But now the other dimension that we need to focus on is, how do you get an appropriate prioritized work list for radiologists? How should
Right.
they know what to look at first? So putting some intelligence around that, that's where you can start plugging AI and all of the other trends the market trends, and all of the latest technologies into that whole space, what you can do is actually provide an intelligent work list where the radiologist can be the second look, not necessarily the first look.
Hmm.
Allow CAD and those other types of functionalities come in and identify masses if they need to, and say this is just a calcification, this is something that requires a diagnostic mammo, all those types of things, different BIRADs and all that other fun stuff that comes down to it. How do you intelligently categorize all that so when a radiologist comes in, they don't just simply do first in, first out. They're looking intelligently at these cases need to have more scrutiny so I can provide a better result and get that result back faster. And then towards the bottom, I'll be the second look. Nothing was found, but the radiologist's eye is ultimately the great equalizer there and say, all right, I also did not see anything. See, I'm in tech. Turn it off, turn it back on. There you
Hardware
go.
layer. Hardware layer.
It's
It has served me well for 20 plus years in the IT field.
Yeah. So you brought up some really good points about the radiologist, right, and time stuff like that. And I think that could lead, and Kyle, I'll let you drive here, but like let's talk about like the data, talk about the hanging protocols, talk about the workflow, right? Those efficiencies and how that impacts care.
Yeah, workflows rely on that work list, right? The work list of what they get first is what they should be looking at first from a prioritization perspective. Put some intelligence behind it. But now every radiologist should be able to read the way that they were taught how to read.
Mhm.
If they put their films up backwards, right was on the left hand side, left was on the right hand side. If that's the way that their attending physician was taught back in the day, they should be able to set up their hanging protocols that way. And unfortunately, hanging protocols become such a challenge to manage. It's almost like they can take a cue from Microsoft, oddly enough, but run user profile management a little bit differently and allow the hanging protocols to not be such a challenge, allow them to be backed up appropriately so that they can work the way that they know how to work. That's an efficiency thing right there. It's not just configuration for the sake of I like mine a certain way. It's an efficiency thing, and they need to be given the appropriate views into things. And one of the challenges that I've run into is you find a PAX, and even looking for talent. I can go back to that hackathon example.
Mhm.
That's an unconventional method that vendors were able to leverage to find talent, right? It's not like they put an ad out and were able to bring in 3 offers that day. They used a hackathon that a local college was putting together around a cybersecurity hacking element. How were they able to get 3 offers in one day with almost no recruiting effort? They spent the day and they observed, and they were able to use the full day as an interview. Very unconventional approach. Doing that in healthcare, I think, is something that has served me well, but I think it's not unique to healthcare, but I think healthcare could use a lot more of it. A lot of times when recruiting for talent in the healthcare space, you look for a round peg in a round hole. So when you look for, hey, I really need to solve these issues going on at the radiologist workstation so that they can get patients' information back, you look for a PACS administrator. Now, PACS administrator with Konica experience, but you run Sectra, that's going to be your second or third choice. You're going to want to find the square peg in the square hole. It becomes very challenging because that pool of candidates gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So sometimes what you need to do, and Solus did this with me. They took a chance on someone who didn't have experience in that space, but they've seen problems solved in different theaters. So if you're able to solve these problems in different theaters, you're not doing things the same way it's always been done. When you're architecting a solution, you're not doing it the same way it's always been done, yielding the same results. And they did that with me. I had a retail, higher ed, and financial background. It had nothing to do with healthcare. But meanwhile, technology and aggressive problem solving and building teams, because it starts and ends with people at the end of the
Mhm.
day, it's that's something that I had much more experience in, and they took a chance, and we were able to solve 3 hospital joint venture integrations, which some would consider some of the most tricky things to solve for. We solved all of them in 2 years. We solved 3 of them in 2 years that had been lagging for about 4 or 5 years prior. So we were able to knock out some good stuff very quickly.
So it sounds like you're able to come into a complex situation and make it easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's technology is complicated. It is very complicated, and to find people who can communicate in a way that others can relate to what's going on is a challenge. But I think when you find someone who's worked in various different venues, and now of course that doesn't mean abandon all people with healthcare experience just to hire someone different. You got to find
Please
a
no.
yeah.
Yeah, please no.
But if you find the right kind of mindset, the right kind of communicator, you might get things that you never even thought possible in that space. Because if someone has learned to communicate in various different industry verticals, they now have that ability to communicate in healthcare or banking or whatever field they choose. It's really about taking a problem, understanding what motivates the person you're speaking to, right? Know your audience, and then ultimately describe what the issue is. And that's how you can really come up with more collaborative problem solving.
So from your perspective, with how do you architect something that's that geographically diverse? So Solus, you said 80 centers. I think it's all over the U.S. So from an architecture perspective, how do you even begin to design something for that?
So there's a lot to it. Architecture is um, in there's people involved in architecture. Oddly enough, you think architecture, you're thinking pliers, wires, and plumbing, right?
Right.
But architecture is about people because the total cost of ownership of a service and the problem that you're trying to solve for ultimately involves people. It involves monthly recurring expenses, it's capital investment, it's cost to bring people up to speed, training, etc. So there's a lot to it. Whenever you're designing an enterprise solution, what you have to look at are several things. What is the you can't solve the problem in the radiologist room today immediately. You can't. There are certain things that some wrenches you can turn to make things better. But when you're solving and creating a roadmap, you have to understand where the business is going, what potential opportunities are going to be facing this business. That way, you can direct investments in the right direction. And I always say, invest where you differentiate, and let someone else handle the rest. you know, so invest where you differentiate. If you have a geographically dispersed environment, what you differentiate in is the same experience across the entire environment. You can't scale unless you have a standardization play anywhere in there. So geographically dispersed means, once again, to the trucking company analogy, if I have all my images in my quote unquote home office, right, at my logistics center, the data center, to send something that's close by with a certain network pipe, not a big deal. But now, if you have to be feeding all of these centers with images all day long because patients are coming in and out, how do you do that? That's where you have certain questions answered. Okay, if we're going to keep growing in this manner and we're going to keep needing to have images available immediately, there are certain features of different providers out there that solve for this geographically dispersed equation, which it naturally lends itself to being a cloud-based solution. The cloud, you basically have your big network pipe out into the cloud, and then you have a content delivery network in your AWSs, your Azures, your others, or sometimes your PACS provider has already invested in that type of infrastructure where you can just simply pull it down out of the cloud. The challenge you have then, though, whenever you go to the cloud, is you're now relying on either that PACS vendor to provide you more insight and support as to what your images are doing, where they're going, etc. And the other challenge there is financially. Financially, you've taken a capital expense of buying a whole bunch of disk, buying a whole bunch of PACS software and installing it on servers that live in your data center. You're taking capital investment that requires a 5 year, and I hate to say it, sometimes it lags itself into 10 years of tech refresh that you end up with these defibrillators of capital investment. Like, boom, all right, we need $10 million to throw into this. Whereas you're changing the financial landscape from a capital expenditure over, a periodic influx of cash into a steady monthly recurring expense. That's where your Opex of a cloud-based subscription comes in. So capital versus operational is something that you have to discuss with your financial folks and the business direction of your company. Whenever you have an operational expense, a monthly recurring cost, you've now taken an impact to EBITDA. And at that point, if your company has a valuation, let's say it's a private equity backed company that's looking to do a private equity turn, the valuation of that company is based on EBITDA. If you're impacting EBITDA because of your architectural solution, you have to be able to account for it in other ways, saying, well, we have a cloud-based solution, but we have scalability. The nature of this business is to grow by integration. We have standardized plugins into our cloud-based solution. So now we can grow in an unlimited manner. And then you can almost excuse the EBITDA impacting indiscretion of going to a cloud-based solution and you can make that justification. But a lot of times that doesn't get tied off at the back end because people don't speak business and financial as well as enterprise solution. So there's a lot of dimensions that go into an enterprise architecture. It's a series of capabilities you got to consider.
So, Guhan, I have a quick question for you. So, with that in mind, EBITDA, right? And you're talking about joint ventures.
Yeah.
They don't, and then you get into Capex versus Opex. Uh, I don't see a lot of JVs embracing the Opex model. Can you dive into the reason why? Because you would think that would be welcomed, right? Especially based on scale, training, interoperability. And you think that would actually lower the cost of operations. But I mean, we both know that a lot of times you get into the JV marketplace, the capex is the preferred choice of investment. Even though we're seeing a huge shift now going towards the investment in cloud operations and cloud services when it comes to providing services in healthcare.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's almost like you're ultimately based on the way computing is going and the way computing and scale is going, we're going to be dragging JV partnerships kicking and screaming into the world of recurring expense because anytime you want to build scale, reliability, and if you want to build a smooth operation, you're ultimately going to have to move several, if not all, functions into the cloud because ultimately you can't really say the cloud is always cheaper because of the financial landscape and the ultimate cost over 3 years, but your capabilities become that much greater. JVs have a specific budgeted amount around capital. They've agreed to it at the beginning, at the signing of the joint venture agreement. They have a specific amount of capital they can spend. And at that point, a lot of times the JV, the smaller of the two partners, the hospital system doesn't often have to push in a ton of cash. They put in their assets, whereas the JV puts the smaller partner puts the cash in. Now, if the hospital comes back and they have to put in more cash in terms of an ongoing monthly basis, they don't feel like they're getting the value on a month to month because they look at, well, my run rate has gone up. That shouldn't happen when I'm creating a partnership. I should find a run rate going down. And that's one of the challenges that they wrestle with. The challenge is it's more than just a black and white answer when it comes to we should go with an OPEX based solution because now you have cost predictability. You also have scale predictability. There's a lot more predictability baked into that. But I think there's a disconnect between the folks who architect the deal of the JV partnership and the ongoing financials and the people who ultimately architect the tools that are needed and the cost structures around those.
That's fascinating. Because based on what I'm seeing, I'm seeing large enterprise institutions that are now outsourcing a lot of their expertise to third party. I'll use the word just vendors, right? They're looking ways to change the way business is done. They're calling it this. Hey guys, this is the new way. This is the way things are going to be going forward. And I think they're looking for ways to really to offset the heavy costs. And in fact, they're using a third party vendor that can tie into their operations. Is that accurate? An accurate assessment?
It is. I can give you an example in the world of mammography. A lot of hospitals will want to get into a joint venture partnership with a company like Solus, or there's others out there like Touchstone and several other imaging providers out there. Why do they want to get into business with that? A lot of times, especially in the radiology platform, the biggest capital expense and the often least looked upon slice of radiology service line is mammography. Going from 2D to 3D, there are a lot of hospitals who still are in 2D mammograms, whereas 3D provides so much more insight into the image that you pull from the patient. If a company like Solus will say, we'll put up the capital to bring in GE or Hologic or whoever it is in terms of the devices that now cost about $500,000 per device. These are not insignificant numbers. To bring in a brand new capability of 3D mammography, which turns into a marketing element, not only obviously a patient benefit, but a marketing element too, that is a great benefit to come in. And the hospital often brings in their capital of, well, we're providing the physician group, we're providing the other things, and then the joint venture, smaller specialist company will put up the capital to purchase those particular items. Yeah, the world of JV accounting can be very interesting because who puts up the capital for what? Who puts up the existing assets other than capital? into the partnership. So that can have a dynamic that changes quite a bit. But in general, when you take assets in cash and you say, no, we're going to shift this into an operational resource, even capital leases, right? This device is making me money, so it's a capital lease. But now when you go to the cloud, the world of capital lease doesn't really happen. It's not widely accepted just yet. I think a couple of companies are playing around with it because this was one of my questions that I had to several vendors back in the day when, all right, these are all devices that are supporting how this company makes business. Is this a capital element? You got to then at that point, I don't have 3 letters of C, P, and A behind my name, so I can't really say what the rules should be. However, my interpretation, GAP, Guhan's average weighted accounting principles, my GAP analysis is basically that if this is a device that's providing us a money-making opportunity, it is an asset, maybe we should be able to put a capital lease against it. So that's a question that I think maybe a financial person would be able to better answer.
So one of the things you said earlier kind of caught my attention, and that was that cloud isn't always cheaper. Well,
Yeah.
that seems to be a little contradictory to what everyone's saying. I thought cloud would always be cheaper than owning and managing your own. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think it's a simple phrase or condemnation to put out there that cloud is not cheaper. It all depends on the perception of the audience. When you look at a cloud-based migration, you can move your data in for free, but pulling your data out costs money. So you can look at that as, okay, that's more expensive, right? You can say on a monthly basis, the maintenance for, I'll give you a basic infrastructure example, the maintenance for software and hardware associated with a PAC system, right? It's a lot of disk and it's an expensive software license that's usually procedure-based license costs, etc. That ends up being, your large, expensive things that you start putting in, and then your monthly maintenance. The usual calculation is if I spent 100% on a piece of equipment, 20% is going to be my yearly maintenance. That's the basic give or take equation. So 20% of something like that ends up being smaller than your monthly run rate of a piece of the cloud infrastructure. Cloud ends up being a little more expensive on the maintenance side. However, your skill sets of your people need to change and you can do more. And that's where the people part of the equation, I mean, of course, it's all the way through an enterprise solution, but another consideration of a cloud migration is your people. Are your people who are managing servers, who are managing very specific things, their skill set has to change. Their skill set has to develop into more business aligned technology functions as opposed to strict business agnostic infrastructure, right? That's the shift that the cloud really forces you to do some strategic talent management.
Yeah, one thing I think is going to be valuable for people when they think about the cloud is like what you brought up earlier. It's when you have a defined group of people who are using a solution that's cloud driven. There was one thing about the cloud is the fact that it can integrate quicker and less. It's less expensive. Now you can have interoperability. When you have the interoperability, now you can actually access that data with its analytics. You're measuring for performance, right? You're measuring for some type of dynamic, and then you can learn from that to train and adjust for your staff and try to find out how you can leverage information to create a better outcome for the patient. So I think it can speed. If you have access to the right data, right, and if it's clean data, then you can make those actionable changes versus having to have something that's on-prem and constantly paying for those licensing and the project management and the integrations. Where in the cloud, that's already been done. That's a plug and play scenario for a lot of the people out there who are savvy and they have those relationships in place. I think that's one of the reasons why maybe Salesforce has been so crazy successful in their market, because they have all that already. It's a mature process. So people can pick it up, train quickly, integrate into the necessary back offices they need, and serve the customers. And I think from taking this back to the healthcare side, one day maybe we'll see imaging be able to adopt this type of philosophy and do it well, like you said, right? And have a true decentralized model to where you have an archive that houses pretty much all the intellectual property in imaging, and people can truly access it much quickly, much more easier, and the cost to operate is much lower. No, I'm not the first person to talk about this by any means. Kyle can speak just much better than I can. But coming from Solus, I know that you had brought up one time about doing edge networking. How would that play into the future that you see within imaging and healthcare?
So that's a great question. When you're talking about these large images floating all around the country, right, going back and forth, they're acquired each day, and then they're held, and then they get sent back. The world of having building your own compute at the centers across the country, then moving maybe a little bit larger and a little bit of abstraction of what that compute looks like by going to a hyper-converged solution in each center. And then the next iteration is buying the big enough, a big enough pipe where you can just simply bypass the hyper-converged piece where you don't have that staging area, and then you can send data straight into the cloud where you can go. It's one of the capabilities that I was looking for in a PACS provider. I think the maturity level of different PACS providers is still coming up in terms of their differentiation between on-prem versus cloud or hybrid. And that's where I feel like infrastructure and cloud have that commingling where you need to be able to speak both languages, and you have to say, all right, it's old data. So a lot of times you can have old data sitting, in a place where it's infrequently accessed. Meanwhile, when a patient comes in, you're looking at today's data and last year's and 5 years prior. It ends up having to be a mix of on-prem, which can be buy your own compute, or then move to hyperconverged, or go straight to the cloud. It's all about when you do hyperconverged, it's a larger capital investment, but it's a little easier to manage. When you go straight to the cloud, it's a lower capital investment because now your monthly run rate is going to go up because you're buying a bigger pipe. Because now nothing is stored on premise. You need a big enough pipe to be able to shoot images back and forth. So a lot of those questions and architectures need to be clearly defined, but they have to thoroughly understand what your business process really looks like, what the capability of your staff, not only in the center, but in your headquarters or wherever your IT staff's located, what their capabilities are, so that the solution can be architected to be a good fit for not only your process, but your talent.
Well, it's interesting you talk about cloud and mammography because those are probably the two things that people would least put together. When you look at imaging, obviously, tomos can get up into gigabyte or more,
Yeah.
and so that's the last thing that most organizations would attempt to put onto the cloud. How did that change your strategy in terms of on-prem to hybrid to cloud, knowing that that data size is massive, and of course, many of the mammo docs want all priors.
Right, and not just priors of Tomo. They want all relevant priors of
Right.
midsection, etc. That was one of the biggest challenges that we had. We were using the Sectra pack system, which is it's growing in market share. It's a great pack system. However, it was not architected best for what we were trying to do, right? At that point, you go into a build it or buy it situation. Do I want to build my own pack system? It's not really something that you want to get into. um, Let the coders do that, and there are plenty of providers out there who might be able to tailor a system or configure their system a little bit closer to what you need. Um, One of the things that we ran into with the PACS providers is that the ones that were specialized in different areas offered more cloud capability, whereas the ones who had a lot of experience in Mammo, to your point, didn't have a ton of cloud capability, which, because of the large file sizes, they felt that it wasn't the right place to start, which I thought was kind of weird. But we looked at several because we were evaluating which would be a better solution overall. And some of the cardiovascular imaging systems were actually better suited, in my opinion, to providing a cloud elevation for mammography because of its retrieval and storage capability and the speed at which that it housed all of this data. They were cloud first, which is really an overutilized term. Cloud first strategy is not the right way. That means I'm gonna, to use a term that you would use, if every problem is a nail, then all you have is a hammer, or something to that effect. I might be misquoting it, but basically using the same tool to solve any problem is not the right way to do it. And that's where I ran into a lot of challenges. So ultimately, what we ended up doing is just putting larger network pipes in there in each center so that they could pull priors in. We had a server in every center, so that would be like an edge device holding staged data for the next patients. The challenge is when you have walk-ins, that staged data isn't going to work for you. You still have to sit there and wait upon the draw. So at that point, those pipes had to grow, and that's where we went into SD-WAN technology, and um, IBM had the concept of regional servers, which is another good idea where they have a specific name for it, but I call it regional or satellite servers. Essentially, it's what it was. It served a region because chances are a patient's priors, they're going to be going to centers that are near their home. And most of those priors can be found if you kept it in a, not necessarily all the way back in a data center, but maybe in a metro Ethernet connected uh, data center, or even a center that has a secure closet that can help hold a lot more data in it, and then ultimately phone home so that you have your big image archive and then you have small regional servers. So it's really, we looked at a couple different mixes and hybrids of full cloud solutions, which didn't deliver the other dimension of great hanging protocol structures, of great usability and worklist capability, but really good image retrieval because it's all in the cloud. And then we looked at other systems where you had to house it in your data center, and that ended up also having its challenges because of the national infrastructure you have to put together. And ultimately, you're going to pay for it somewhere, whether it's large network pipes or a cloud subscription or a combo of both. That's where it all. There's so many different considerations you have to put together. It's almost a matrix-like decision that you have to really consider.
So, thinking out loud, when you take a look at how cloud is here to stay, and now healthcare has adopted it, we now see telehealth that is not going away either. You don't have reimbursement there. Um, where's the next thing? Where are we headed? How does cloud influence services and delivery models? Because somewhere, someone's going to bring the ability to do the distribution of large images successfully. And it should, I would think, be happening sooner than later. And if we have the ability to do Netflix at mass scale, I know it's different technology,
Sure.
different data, but ultimately, where do you see it going? Especially from your leadership role, right? You really do come from a hybrid background. You've done finance, retail. You walked into healthcare, and you made a difference there. And you've seen where you can improve efficiencies greatly. But sometimes you walk into a model that's so deep that there's not enough dollars to change the direction of that model, so you have to work with what you have. But if you could walk into an environment, an institution, and you had that unique capability with a budget, where would you take this? What would you do?
Well, that's a thinking without restrictions question. If I were to do so, one example, and I'll even draw a parallel from a previous industry I was in retail. One of a big game changer in my opinion with imaging, especially when companies like Hologic are introducing some things like HD clarity, which is taking a tomo image and now tripling the size of it. Radiologists are loving it, and IT people are like, no, please don't do that. Um, and meanwhile, at the end of the day, if you have that patient first mindset, is it the right thing for the patient all day long, every day? So how do you continue to enable that? I don't like the word support. How do you enable that? Because IT is an enabler. Even to your example of Netflix, what is Netflix doing? Netflix is compressing and streaming video streams, right? Are you able to compress and stream images? No. The FDA does not allow you to do things like that. If you are able to do, and the naked eye at a certain point can only detect a certain number of pixels. So depending on how much clarity and resolution you can get, it's not going to make a difference to your eye. It's going to make a difference to an AI algorithm, but not to the human eye. So if you can ultimately create a political action committee, which a lot of places do have, so that you can put together these true, what I'll call a Pepsi challenge of a compressed image being pushed across a network versus a lossy compression image. Let me put it that way, because there is compression allowed, but not lossy compression.
Right.
If you can allow lossy compression and an actual image to be run side by side and show that there really is not a difference, that would be a game changer, and it would really unbridle the technology at the mammography or imaging tower, at the imaging side of things, as well as the IT side of things, because now you can meet that demand by doing different types of infrastructure, different types of solutions behind it. So we created a political action committee when I was in the retail space, and we were able to make significant changes. that allowed for the technology to move that much further. This was going in the retail space. Healthcare has it as well. I just don't know how strong it is, but I think vendors would be interested in participating. I think that would allow for it. Allowing for compression of these images is going to be game changing. And in the meantime, you can still have AI taking the raw, humongous images, doing its processing on it to allow for the intelligent work listing where it found something 1.5 millimeters of suspicion, whereas your eyeball may not be able to find 1.5 millimeters. But with that HD clarity, with that 4K versus 1080p, right? Go into the highest resolutions. Let the AI handle the work listing of what the RAD should be looking at, and then use lossy compression for the naked eye to have an appropriate comparison. I think that's something worth exploring. Is that necessarily the only way? But no, in my opinion of having just my background and what's worked well, and how you can modify a few things that you don't think you have control over, I think that would make a big difference.
Now, that's really interesting because if you think about it, with all of the different slices within that study, there's really only a couple that you absolutely need to zoom in on to the calcifications for that where the pathology is. So you're right in that there's a lot of, I hate to say wasted, but just a lot of data that's the normal stuff is all, you don't really need the full resolution for all the normal slices. And
Yep.
I would think anyway, I'm not Dr. Kyle. That's an interesting idea. That would be really cool.
I mean,
That would be
think of
really
the
cool.
impact, right? It would be incredibly cool. Think of the impact it would have on efficiencies, on
Right.
speed to diagnosis, speed to therapy, how that changed the perception of the patient itself, right? Because if you think about that, if there were a way to either do a pack or to come forward with a new protocol that would bring the data over that could be analyzed, like you said, let the AI handle the lower hanging fruit, and let the secondary be used for the radiologist, right? Um, that would be a tremendous game changer. You would think that someone would be working on this to where because it would lower the cost and drive such greater scale and adoption.
Yeah, yeah, it's like going from Redbox where you have to select what movie you want, you pull the DVD, you bring it home, to
Mhm.
Netflix that has the best work list algorithm in the business. If if
Yeah.
it looks at your likes and what you've seen, it comes up with the best list of any other, and then it has its own protocols for streaming. You're
Right.
moving from Redbox to Netflix of imaging. I think that would be game changing.
And then to Kyle's point, for those image sets that did require such high scrutiny and specialization, fine. Then you have a separate network or you have some type of a layer that comes in to complement that, to enable that, right? So you can mitigate that risk. But no, I love what you bring forward to the table, Guhan. You're able to completely leverage your different industries, your experience to help solve complex problems. And you really understand people, where people play the role in helping be part of that, of solving, right? And to help create the outcomes you're looking for. So I'm curious as to what's next on in your life here, right? You have all those unique experiences, and clearly you have some world-class experience from Tarrant County as well as with Solus. Uh, in your current role right now, give us some more detail about this. What are you looking to accomplish there, and where are you headed?
Yeah. So as we had discussed once before, it's very complicated to come up with enterprise solutions, to come up with a roadmap for an organization based on things that you can control, things that you cannot control, financial landscapes, roadmaps. Where do you invest? Where do you invest? Where you differentiate? Where do you divest? Where you don't need to be the best at that particular dimension? That is really what I work on. That's what I do. I work for D&M Enterprise Group.
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to find an easy button for all of this complicated stuff to navigate, one of the things is working with D&M Enterprise Group. What we do is we come in and we start with some of the simpler things. Where do you not need to be focusing so much time? Network circuits and carriers and management of those of connectivity, dealing with, if you have a contact center, dealing with all the different tool sets that are out there for contact centers and intelligence around those whole kinds of things. And then moving it up in a layer into strategic road mapping. So really running the gamut, but starting with the things that are noise, that sometimes they may be so noisy you can't even see what you're doing or hear what you should be doing. But removing the noise, starting out there, building that trusted partnership, and then ultimately offering the service too of, let's figure out strategically a roadmap for this organization. Where should it go? What should the organization for IT look like? What is it? What are the skill sets you really need to have? Now let's talk about people. Let's place the people that you have in these boxes that we're creating the new org for. All the way through the planning of where you should invest in what tool sets, what are the right tool sets for what functions the business is performing now or going to be performing. That's what we do at D&M Enterprise Group. I've actually used them in the past to help me with those types of things, and now I've joined the organization because I want to help others do the same thing, and it's been very beneficial to me. So it's one of those things where I don't have to be in sales. I'm more of an ethical influencer. What I have is so good. I want you to have some of it too. You know.
Well
So,
said. Well said.
so does D&M just help plan out the strategic plan, or is there other services that you do with that D&M offers?
They are actually a channel partner.
Hmm.
So any types of services. So for example, when I was building centers across the country, what the team internally at Solus, you would have to go out and build these centers, all the tech. And that works when you're building one or two a year. When you have to build one a week, that doesn't work anymore. It doesn't
Right.
scale. What D&M allowed me to do is create basically a small, medium, and large type of contract where I could
Mhm.
hit easy buttons based on the size of center I was building. They would set up the network. They would set up all the equipment, order it all, have it all shipped, drop shipped, pre-configured, and it allowed us to open centers one week, one a week, which is huge. And I don't need to have a national footprint as a CIO of an organization, but I do need a partner who has a nationwide footprint where I can just say, "Hey, go do that. I need your help. You go find the right people, go ship me the right equipment, and have it there on time. Build the plan out and do it." That's what D&M. I've used them in the past for, and It makes it not noise anymore. It makes it nice and peaceful and quiet, and I can worry about the larger scale and larger order problems. So now I'm part of that. That's where I start, and then I actually help with the larger scale problems because now the noise has been attenuated, and I can help focus business leaders and IT leadership on where they really need to be going and how they need to meet together.
Well, I think we all want that easy button and the ability to, as you said earlier, a few minutes ago, focus on our differentiators, focus on what we're good at, and let someone else handle the noise. That's a really great point.
Yep, as Peter Drucker said, make your strengths so damn good that your weaknesses don't even matter.
I
Like it.
need to put that on my desk. That is awesome. Thank you, Guhan.
No worries. Thank you guys. This has been great.
Yeah. No, really appreciate it, and perhaps some really great insights. We look forward, hopefully, to a future conversation again.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it as well.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks.